Hi, Bob from Poliigon here. In this video we're going to take the wooden floor material we made in the last video and add in some surface imperfections, namely some smudges and scratches, to give our floor a more realistic lived-in feel. Now let's take a look at the files we'll be needing during this video. We're going to need floor smudges type A medium 001 and gun scratches 003, both of which I already have saved to my hard drive, and I'll include a link to them below this video. Okay, let's head over to Maya. Okay, so this is our scene from last time. As you'll remember, or hopefully, the converter did the majority of the work for us, brought in all our textures and connected up the nodes and whatnot. All we did was add in this multiply node to control the amount of impact that our gloss map, or at this point it's a roughness map, has on our finished material. The material was looking a little too, reflections were looking a little too blurry, not reflective enough, so we adjusted that slightly. And that was it. Now in this video we're going to be working quite a bit more in depth with the nodes, but before we get started I just want to explain exactly what it is we're about to do. We're going to be taking our original roughness map, where the dark areas are more shiny, more reflective, and the brighter areas are less shiny. And then we're going to import our smudges texture. We're going to take the brighter areas of that map, i.e. the footprints and smudges and whatnot, and add that over the top of our roughness map. So on the actual material, wherever there's footprints and smudges and whatnot, there'll be, the reflections will be more blurred, less reflective, just in those areas, which is exactly the sort of effect that we want. Once we have this sort of combined roughness map, we'll then feed that into our wooden floor material. Okay, so let's get started on our nodes. I'm going to move this roughness map up out the way because we don't need to work on that. It doesn't really matter where you put the nodes in Maya, because every time you reload the material it will tend to relay out the nodes anyway. But I just want lots of space around this gloss/roughness map because that's what we're going to be working on. Okay. So just to make it clear what's going on with these three nodes before we start, this is the gloss map that we bring in, well, that got brought in for us by the converter. This node is inverting it into a roughness map, and then, as I said, this node is giving us some adjustment over that roughness map. So it's going to be after these three that we start to introduce the floor smudges. So let's bring in the smudges. I'm going to type in image, and it's an Octane image texture node that we want, and I'll place that here, and I'll give it a name of smudges because that's what it's going to be. And then I'm going to go and find my floor smudges. Here they are. Now there's a couple of different options, though the one we're going to be using is the 16-bit TIFF file. With a 16-bit image you get basically more color depth, more detail from the texture. So let's hit open on that, and then we need to change the gamma on it to 1. By default when you bring a texture in it will be at 2.2. We want to set it to 1 though. As a general rule, when you have a texture that's affecting the color of your material, such as obviously the color texture, but also the reflection one, you leave that on 2.2 because that will mean that any color corrections applied to your material or to your render from Octane will apply to those textures. But we don't want anything like that. We want the raw information from this smudges texture. So just set the gamma down to 1. And yeah, that's it. That's that node done. So the next thing we need to do is find a way to introduce our smudges texture into our roughness map. Yeah. Now what you would do in a lot of renderers is use a composite node or a mix node and select the type screen, because a screen mix is a brilliant way of taking the white areas of an overlay texture such as our smudges texture and adding them on top of a roughness map. Now in the case of Octane, it doesn't have a screen mix type yet. Maybe it will one day, but it certainly doesn't yet, so we're going to have to do it manually. So a little bit separate from this, I'm going to show you how to quickly make a couple of nodes that will act as a screen mix type. Okay. So what we'll need is 3 Octane invert textures. Okay, I'm just going to place them in this sort of position here, and then we also need a multiply one, which is not multiply divide, that's not right, sorry, an Octane multiply texture, and I'll place that about there. Right, so to explain what a screen does, it essentially takes the two textures that are going into it, inverts them both, then does a multiply operation, then inverts that result, and then spits it out. That's what a screen does. So we're just mimicking that with the nodes that we have available to us. So if I let's name these appropriately. So this is it's all part of our screen operation. So this is the screen in 1. So the first input of our screen, and then we'll call this screen in 2, and then we'll call this screen out, and then we'll call this screen. But just to remind us what it's doing, I'm also going to call it multiply. Okay, bit confusing, but hey. So now we just need to connect these up. So the output from this first node we'll put into texture 1, and then the output from the second one we'll put into texture 2, and then the output of that we'll put into screen out, into the texture of screen out, and we now have our screen operator. Yeah. So let's just squidge these together a little bit and drag them up to where they're going to be useful, which is about here. Okay, so now we have the things in place that we need to do what we want to do. So I am leaving a bit of space there because there will be another node coming, but let's make sure this is working first. So smudge is going to the texture of the screen in 2, and then the roughness map goes into texture 1, or screen in 1, sorry. It's then going through these nodes, and the output we'll put into roughness. And straight away you can start to see we have our smudges, which is good. So first we need to do two things to these smudges. Yeah, we need a way of adjusting the scale of them, and we also need a way of adjusting the amount of them, the strength, because at the moment those smudges are looking a bit over the top. We don't want this effect to be too blatant. It's supposed to be quite a subtle effect, so we're going to need to add in an adjustment for that as well. So first of all, let's bring in I think it's a UV scale. Yeah, scale. Octane scale transform. That's what we want. I don't know why that's there. Forget we saw that. Okay, so I'm going to put this here, and then I'm going to connect the output from this into the transform, like so. And then from here we can now adjust the scaling. So if I change this scaling to make it something obvious, like 10, you'll then see our smudges have got huge, you can barely even see them, yeah, but it shows the nodes working. So we'll try a value of about 2.5. I think that should about work, because what we want is for the footprints, there's a good example there at the top left hand corner, the footprints to look realistic compared to the size of the floorboards. Perhaps 2.5 was a little high actually. Let's try 2. Yeah, I think that works quite nicely for us. So that's our smudges scaled just about correctly, I think. So now all we need is a method of controlling the strength, and we've already done this on our original roughness map in the first video. It's just a multiply node. Yeah. So let's go multiply, Octane multiply texture, and we'll call this smudges adjust, and then feed the output from the smudges texture into texture 1, and then the output of the adjust into that screen in 2 that we made. And you'll see all the smudges have gone, and that's because by default the multiply operation, the texture 2 part here, is set to 0. If we put that all the way back up to 1, we're back to where we were, and we want to go for about a halfway point of about 0.5 or so. And you'll now see that the smudges are, you can still see them, but they're nowhere near as obvious. It's a nice subtle effect, which is exactly what we wanted. Right, so next up is our scratches. We're done with our smudges and we're done with the roughness map as well. And thankfully, the scratches, are quite simple compared to this this mess of nodes that we've just created. So let's bring in another image texture, Octane image texture, I should say, and we'll call this scratches. There we go. I'm going to set the gamma now to 1 because, as we mentioned earlier, if it's a texture that doesn't affect the color, that's what we want it set to. And now we just need to load in the texture. So where is mine? Where's it gone? Gun scratches 003. Now within that there's actually quite a few options. You've got a displacement texture, normal texture, and some overlays. I'm going to stick with what we had before, which was the 16-bit overlay. And there we go. So with the scratches we can basically feed that directly into the bump map of the wood flooring. Now you won't see a bump on there, just connect it to that top dot, hit other, and then we can find bump, which is brilliant. On a lot of renderers would have to combine the normal information from the bump into the existing normal map, but Octane gives us a handy little input for bump, so that's brilliant. Right, so 2 problems, or maybe even 3 actually. Yeah, 3. The scaling's off, the scratches are way too strong, and they're bumping in the wrong direction. This is a good example here. If you look at this scratch here, you can see it's casting a bit of a shadow. These scratches are coming out of the floor, where obviously we want them to cut into. So we need to address all 3 of those issues. We'll start with scaling. So let's bring up our scale transform again that we used earlier and put the output into the transform. There we go. So now we've got some adjustment over the scale. Now I'm thinking a value of about 0.3 should work pretty well. Yeah. Obviously it's still a bit of a hideous mess at the moment, but in terms of scaling I think that's about where we want it. And the next thing we're going to do is invert this texture. By inverting it, we're fixing the problem of the scratches bumping out. They're now bumping into the floor. Brilliant. So that's 2 done. Last one is to basically do what we've done before. We want to add in a multiply node to lessen the impact of the scratches on our finished shader. Yeah. So multiply again. Octane multiply texture. We'll call this one scratches. Oh, scratches. Adjust. And then connect up the output from that one into texture 1. The output from that into, I'm getting lost now, the bump map. And now this will give us, hopefully, some control over our scratches. And as you can see, because it defaults to 0 here, all our scratches have gone. So we want to put in a tiny value here, probably like 0.005 or something close to that. Just a nice subtle effect of some scratches. Even that might be too high, but certainly for the purpose of this tutorial I think it will do the job. What I will do though is close this down. That's us done, by the way. We can you can give yourselves a pat on the back. Close down the hypershade and we'll close this down, and I'm just going to set up some settings for a final render, and then I'll pause the recording while that's running. And we'll just go for 1080p. That should be fine. Right, okay. So there's our finished render, and it's looking pretty good. I'd possibly make those floor smudges just a tiny little bit more obvious, just very, very slightly though. The scratches aren't looking too bad. I'll probably make some minor adjustments to the scaling and the strength still, but I'm kind of picky like that. But certainly for the purpose of a tutorial, I think we can call that job done. So in summary, we've taken our wooden floor material from the first video and added in some surface imperfections, namely some smudges and scratches, to give our floor a more realistic lived-in feel.